Resuming debate, le prix de débat, the honourable member for Edmonton St. Albert.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. It's really an honour and a rarity, I suppose, for me to be able to rise and participate in a debate. And I thank my friend from Winnipeg for sharing his time with me to allow me to put a couple of comments on the record regarding this very important motion. And I come to this issue from a slightly different perspective than I think the previous speakers, in that I was elected as a Conservative, as I think the members of this House know, and do support the Prime Minister, although no longer unequivocally since I left his caucus, and I now have taken the position that as an independent member of Parliament I will examine government bills and legislations on a piecemeal basis and support those that I think are meritorious and that are to the benefit of my constituents, and oppose those that are not. And that applies, of course, to opposition motions as well. So when I look at the opposition motion that we're debating here this afternoon, it is with some reluctance that I have come to the conclusion that I have to support this motion, and I'm reluctant for a number of reasons, not the least of which is that it's come to this. That the opposition, Liberal opposition, has to use one of its opposition days to raise a motion to compel the Prime Minister of Canada to appear before the Ethics and Access Committee to testify under oath as to what he did or did not know concerning what is consuming the Canadian public as the Wright Duffy scandal. Now, it's sad that it has come to this point, because I believe in responsible government. I believe that in the British parliamentary system, the government is responsible to the Canadian citizens through this elected chamber. The Canadians elect parliamentarians, 308 of us currently. There will be a few more after the next election, but 308 currently, and our job is to hold the government to account. Now, had the government been more forthcoming with respect to what it knew and what it did not know, then I don't believe that this motion would be necessary. And the fact that it is necessary, I find very, very regrettable. I, too, hear from hundreds of constituents on topics regarding virtually every aspect of government. But in the last 6 months, no single topic has dominated the emails and phone calls and casual conversations that I have with my constituents than the so-called Senate scandal. But it's not a Senate scandal, Mr. Speaker. The problems with respect to the Senate expenses, and there are big problems, but they are, in my view, the least significant aspect of all of this. As offended as I suspect most Canadians are that senators are alleged to have claimed housing and travel expenses that they were not entitled to, and they are outraged at that. But the bigger issue, and certainly the bigger issue in my view and in the view of the Canadians and constituents that I've talked to, is the Prime Minister's involvement with respect to one of those senators, that of course being Senator Duffy. And the bombshell that was dropped in this place on about the 14th or 15th of May, that the former Chief of Staff to the Prime Minister had cut a check in the amount of $90,000 some odd to reimburse the Canadian taxpayers for Senator Duffy's ineligible expense claims. And of course, that raised many questions, not the least of which was what was the quid pro quo? What did the Prime Minister's office and what did the Chief of Staff expect that senator to do in exchange for this very generous gift of $90,000? And of course, we've heard all sorts of allegations and suggestions. The senator himself has indicated in the other place that there was some massive conspiracy orchestrated by the Prime Minister's office to make that scandal go away, which was becoming a political scandal, and therefore I suspect salvage the reputation of the senator, who at one time was a very loyal and valued member of the Conservative caucus and the Conservative Party, especially on the fundraising circuit. But the issue is, and the problem that I have with all of this, from what I hear in the other place, and from what I hear in question period on a daily basis, is that none of this qualifies as evidence. There are many lawyers in this room, and we should be very concerned about what's happening in both of these chambers of Parliament. Everything is protected by privilege. None of it is under oath. and none of it is subject to cross-examination. Yet very serious allegations have been made. It has been suggested that the Prime Minister's office, and I say it's only a suggestion, that they may have breached the Criminal Code of Canada and the Parliament of Canada Act with respect to influencing a sitting legislator. That is a very, very serious charge that, if made out, could result in jail time for those who are convicted of it. On the other side of the equation, of course, 3 senators, their very office holds in the balance of a vote that I suspect is going to take place within the next 90 minutes. And they've been charged with some serious, well, not criminally charged, but they have been accused of being, let me say, creative with respect to their expense accounts. And again, there is all sorts of contrary evidence with respect to those suggestions. There appear to be more or less compliance with the audits that were undertaken, but the legislative committees that examined those audits came to different conclusions and made certain orders, and some of those orders have been complied with, and in the case of Senator Duffy, under some fairly unorthodox matters. But this is where I wish, quite frankly, in this House of Commons during question period, that Canadians and parliamentarians would get the answers that we deserve, quite frankly, because we believe in responsible government. We've had responsible government, Mr. Speaker, in this country since before we were a country. In 1848 in Nova Scotia, Joseph Howe, the then Premier of the then colony of Nova Scotia, was the first colony anywhere in the British North America, anywhere in colonial Britain, to achieve responsible government. A very simple concept, that the government, the cabinet, the executive is responsible to the democratically elected chamber. That's this place. So it's in this place that, all things working out as they should, that the Prime Minister ought to, in my view, answer the questions from the opposition, from the third party, from members of his own caucus, if they were so inclined to ask, with respect to what the Prime Minister knew, when he knew it. And I have consistently believed the Prime Minister, and I've been very public about this, and I've been asked many times, and I've always indicated that I actually believe the Prime Minister's version of events, that he was kept in the dark regarding this highly, highly unusual and unorthodox and possibly illegal transaction between his former Chief of Staff and a sitting senator. But I'm not sure that that ends it. We live under the parliamentary concept, the Convention of Responsible Government. The Prime Minister is responsible for the operation of 2 departments of that government. One, the Prime Minister's office, and the other one is the Privy Council office. The Prime Minister is responsible to this democratically elected chamber for what goes on there. And I think, based on the dribs and drabs of information that we have received during question period, we know that there was some very, very unorthodox activities, possibly illegal activities, between the then Chief of Staff and 3 sitting senators. And it's incumbent upon the Prime Minister to answer not only for what he knew or didn't know, and he's been very clear of what he didn't know, but it's also incumbent upon the Prime Minister to answer for the operation of the department that bears his name. He is the PM in the Prime Minister's office. He's the PM in PMO. And to have such a systemic breakdown of a system where there were no checks and balances, even within the Prime Minister's office, that a rogue Chief of Staff and apparently several others, a few according to the Prime Minister, up to 11 or 12 according to some media reports, that type of systemic breakdown could occur where that number of individuals would be involved or at least had knowledge of an operation, but could somehow keep the Prime Minister unappraised of that. I think that's worthy of examination, and the Prime Minister ought to come forward and with some candor with respect to what goes on in his office. How can this type of activity go on without him knowing about it? Because I was elected as a Conservative, and I'm one of those that came to Ottawa on the so-called white horse to clean up government. And I believe in this Prime Minister, and I would think that the Prime Minister would want the opportunity to salvage his reputation and salvage the reputation of his government by appearing before a committee, since they don't seem to be inclined to do it in the House of Commons during question period, which admittedly offers only for very brief questions and even briefer answers, and seldom are they ever really answers anyways. But in an actual committee where persons have multiple rounds of questions and can follow up, that would be an opportunity for the government, to come clean and for the Prime Minister to restore the integrity of its office, and I think it's important that the Prime Minister do so because the integrity of the Prime Minister is fundamental to Canadians' belief in their government. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Questions and comments? Questions et commentaires. L'honorable député de Mock-Arrête.
The member for Marc-Aurèle-Fortin. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Clearly, this situation shows that when you're in power, some people will show up at our door and abuse the power they have. There is no political party which is safe from this kind of situation. The Duffys of this world are always going to knock on the door of those who are in power. And the question is how to deal with this type of situation. Clearly, the Liberals in the past, the Conservatives today, do not have the answer to that question. We aspire to be elected to positions of power, and we will know how to deal with that situation. In the face of potential corruption, being partisan is not the solution. The point is for some people to try to put the Prime Minister in an embarrassing situation and not to deal with corruption. So today Conservatives are not trying to find a solution to corruption. All you're saying is let's embarrass the Prime Minister and let's hide our problems. No, your problems, their problems, and eventually our problems will be the same, Mr. Speaker. And as far as that is concerned, I would like to know how the Liberal Party will present a long-term solution to all of those solutions to end attempts at corruption. Thank you.
Member for Edmonton St. Albert.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I don't speak for the Liberal Party, so I can't answer that question, but I can comment on what he indicated earlier. How do we restore confidence, and the Canadians have confidence that the government of the day is responsible and is acting in an open and transparent method? And I don't have an easy answer to that question. I would think that in this chamber during the 45 minutes per day of question period, and question period has been almost exclusively consumed with this issue since we got back right after Thanksgiving. And in fact, the nation's business is really being put on the shelf as this chamber, especially during question period, is almost entirely consumed with this one issue. So I don't know what the perfect method is for the government to convince Canadians that they are open and transparent. Question period doesn't seem to be working, so that is why I'm supporting this motion to have the Prime Minister appear before a parliamentary committee. Thank you.
Questions and comments? Questions et commentaires. The honourable member for York West.
By recognizing my honourable colleague and the integrity that is all around him when he talks. He's talking from a position of someone who has had tremendous hurt and pain as a result of his political choices that he's made. And he stands here and fights on behalf of democracy and integrity in this chamber. The fact that the Liberal motion is asking for the Prime Minister to be honest with Canadians and with all of us in Parliament, to me, does not seem so difficult. It's just unfortunate that it's taken a motion from this House to possibly make that happen. And I realize that we're talking about integrity. I'd like to see if the honourable member has any questions or suggestions as to how else we might accomplish, at the end of the day, getting the Prime Minister to be honest with Canadians.
The honourable member for Edmonton St. Albert, you have about a minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank you for the question. I think the Prime Minister and the Prime Minister's office, I'd be the last person that they would take any advice on this issue or any other. But if I were so fortunate, as some members know, before I served in this place, I also had the honour of serving in the Alberta Legislature, and in that capacity I served under former, now deceased Premier Ralph Klein. And he had a very different mechanism or methodology when it came to dealing with problems or even crises. He would get in front of the issue, he'd hold a press conference, he'd have a mea culpa, he'd explain what he knew. The media was very responsive, and he found out that the Alberta electorate could be very, very forgiving. I think a little bit of contrition and openness and transparency would go a long way to restoring Canadians' confidence in this government. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Resuming debate.